All right, so you sent us this research on Presto. It's this open source query engine, and you're really interested in how companies, especially like Facebook and Uber, are using it to analyze huge amounts of data in real time.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's a fascinating topic, right? We're talking massive scale, we're talking needing answers now, not later. So that's what we're going to unpack today, how Presto handles those
It's a
demands.
game changer, for
Yeah.
sure. And it really comes down to solving this, data explosion problem. Companies are drowning in data,
Right.
and it's only getting worse. Think about a company like Uber, right? Every ride, every delivery, every little bit of location data from drivers, it all adds up.
It's like every second there's a tidal wave of new information coming in.
Exactly. And it's not just Uber, it's every company these days,
Mhm.
especially as more and more things become digital.
So we've got mountains of data, but I'm guessing it's not all just sitting in one neat little database, is it?
If only it were that simple. You've got data scattered across so many systems, each with its own quirks. Hadoop for their data warehouse, maybe Pinot for real-time stuff, Elasticsearch, you name it.
So it's a zoo of technologies, each speaking its own language.
A bit like that, yeah. And in the past, if you wanted to get a complete picture, you had to copy data between all these systems. Slow, expensive, a real headache.
Okay, so that's where Presto swoops in, our superhero for data, to try and make sense of all of this.
Exactly. Think of Presto as this universal translator for data. It can talk to Hadoop, it can talk to Pinot, all of them. And it can query that data directly without moving it around.
Wow. Okay, so no more copying gigabytes back and forth just to answer a simple
And
question.
no more. And the cool thing is, it uses standard SQL.
Mhm.
So analysts, they don't need to learn some crazy new language for each system.
It's like having one remote for all your devices. That's a good analogy. I like that. But how does it actually connect to everything? I mean, do they have to build a custom connector for every single system out there?
That's where connectors come in. They're kind of like adapters, right? Each connector knows how to talk to a specific type of data source.
So like a specialist translator for each data language.
Exactly. They handle all the messy details, the data formats, the API calls, all that stuff. So Presto can focus on, what it does best,
Yeah.
which is querying data fast.
Okay, so Presto connects to these sources. It speaks their language thanks to the connectors. But how does it actually query all this data quickly? We're talking potentially petabytes of information here.
Right, and this is where the real genius of Presto comes in. It uses this technique called pushdown. Basically, instead of pulling all the data into Presto and then querying it
Which would take forever.
forever, right? It pushes parts of the query down to the individual data sources.
So it's delegating. It's like, hey, Hadoop, you're good at this. Handle this part. And Pinot, you take care of this.
Exactly. It lets each system do what it's optimized for. Let's say you're Uber, and you want to combine real-time order data from Pinot with your historical data from Hadoop, right?
Okay, so you're tracking, I don't know, some kind of trend. Maybe it's a holiday rush. And you need to compare what's happening right now with what happened last year.
Perfect example. Presto will actually send part of the query to Pinot, part of it to Hadoop. They each do their thing, and Presto puts the results together.
Wow, so it's orchestrating this whole data symphony behind the scenes.
That's a great way to put it, and it's super efficient because it's not moving huge amounts of data around unnecessarily.
This pushdown thing, it sounds amazing, but there's got to be a catch, right? I mean, data in the real world, it's messy, it's complicated, it's not always organized in these nice, neat tables.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to the challenge of nested data. It's everywhere. Think about something as simple as your user profile on, well, any website.
Oh, right. You got your basic info, then your order history, your preferences, all this stuff tucked away.
And each of those can have more nested details, right? It's like those Russian nesting dolls.
Layers upon layers of information.
And querying that efficiently, that's a whole other challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how does Presto handle that, especially when we're talking about these massive data sets?
Well, the old way was basically to unpack all those layers, flatten it all out. And that, my friend, created a huge bottleneck.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but you have to take the haystack apart straw by straw.
Brutal, right? So the developers, they came up with this really clever solution. They built a new Parquet reader.
Okay, hold on. Before we go any further, can you quickly explain what Parquet is for those who might not be familiar?
Sure. Parquet is a file format specifically designed for this kind of complex, nested data. Think of it as a way more efficient way to store and compress data, which makes it faster to query.
Got it. So it's like a turbocharged filing cabinet for big data.
Exactly. And Presto's new Parquet reader is like its secret weapon for dealing with this data efficiently.
Okay, so it can slice and dice this nested data without breaking a sweat. What's the secret
It
sauce?
uses some really smart techniques. One of them is called nested column pruning.
Pruning, like a tree. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine you want to find, let's say, all the Uber drivers in Chicago who completed a trip on, I don't know, October 10th. The old Presto, it would have had to read every single detail of every single trip.
Talk about information overload.
Total overload. But with nested column pruning, Presto can be way more selective. It can zoom in on just the city and date information within those nested trip details and ignore everything else.
So it's like using a metal detector instead of digging up the entire field.
You got it. It skips the irrelevant stuff. And this makes the entire query drastically faster. We're talking sometimes up to 10 times faster.
Okay, that's huge, just by being smarter about what it reads.
Exactly. And there's more.
More. Okay, you're blowing my mind here, but keep going. What else can this new reader do?
Remember how we said Parquet is a columnar format, storing data in columns rather than rows?
Right, like a spreadsheet, I remember.
Well, this new reader, it can read those columns directly. Instead of going row by row, it can just grab the specific data it needs.
So if you only need data from certain columns, you can ignore the rest.
Precisely. It's all about efficiency.
It's like reading specific chapters of a book instead of the whole thing just to find one fact.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so we've talked about speed, we've talked about efficiency, but I know from the research you sent, there are some really interesting ways that Presto is being used that go beyond just, crunching numbers, like really cool applications.
Oh, absolutely. And one that I found super fascinating was how Uber uses Presto to analyze what we call geospatial data. We're talking about data that has a location component.
Right, so mapping out where drivers are in a city, figuring out rider demand in different areas, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And at Uber scale, we're talking about an enormous amount of data, constantly changing.
Yeah, it's like trying to track a million fireflies at night. It's got to be a massive challenge. So how do they even begin to wrap their heads around that much location data with Presto?
It all starts with how they represent that data. They use something called geofences, which are basically digital polygons, kind of like virtual fences drawn on a map.
Okay, so they might draw a geofence around, say, a neighborhood, a stadium, or even a whole city block.
Exactly. And then they can see things like how many trips started or ended within that geofence. Really powerful for understanding things like rider demand and driver supply.
That makes a lot of sense, but I can already see where this gets tricky. We're talking about potentially millions of trips happening across thousands of these geofences.
It's a lot of data.
It's not as simple as just drawing a circle on a map and seeing what's inside. So how does Presto handle that without, melting down?
This is where things get really clever. They use a special data structure called a QuadTree.
A what tree? Okay, you're going to have to break this one down for me.
Imagine you're looking at a map, right? Now, divide that map into 4 equal sections. Then, you take each of those sections and divide them into 4 more. And you keep doing that.
So you're essentially zooming in further and further on the map with each division.
You got it. And what you end up with is this tree-like structure where each branch represents a smaller and smaller part of the map. That's your QuadTree.
Okay, so it's like a family tree, but for locations on a map. I can sort of visualize it.
Exactly. And the beauty of this is it lets Presto quickly eliminate huge chunks of irrelevant geofences. Let's say you want to know how many Uber trips started near Oracle Arena during a Warriors game.
Okay, so you want to see how many people are leaving that specific area after the game.
Right. Well, Presto can use that QuadTree to instantly ignore any sections of the map that don't even overlap with the area around the arena.
It's like, why even bother looking in those areas if you know the trips you're interested in couldn't have started there?
Precisely. It's like having a superpowered spatial index.
So instead of comparing every single trip to every single geofence, Presto can quickly narrow down the possibilities using the QuadTree.
And it makes these types of geospatial queries incredibly fast. Queries that might have taken like days using older methods are now being done in minutes.
Wow, so we're talking about a significant speed boost. That's amazing. This really showcases just how versatile Presto can be. It can handle these really complex data challenges, not just simple database queries.
And that's what makes it so powerful.
But I have to ask, when the data sets are absolutely massive, even for Presto, how do they keep this thing running smoothly? I mean, how do they scale it?
That's where some other clever techniques come in. Things like caching and what we call federation and, of of course, we can't forget about the cloud. It's changed everything.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Let's dive into those because I am ready to hear how they keep this data engine humming even when the demands are through the roof.
So caching and federation, huh? They're like the secret sauce for handling those massive data sets you were talking about.
Exactly those. Because, like, a fast engine is great, but if you're constantly slamming on the brakes because the system can't keep up, it's not very useful.
You're telling me. It'd be like having a Ferrari stuck in rush hour traffic.
Exactly. So caching first, right? How does that help?
Okay, imagine if every time you visited a website,
Every single time.
right, every single time, your browser had to download every image, every little thing from scratch.
Oh my God, I'd be stuck in the internet stone age.
It'd be a nightmare. Luckily, browsers are smarter than that. They remember stuff, they cache it, so next time you go to that website, it loads way faster.
Right. It's like having a cheat sheet. Okay, so Presto does something similar with data.
Precisely. It caches frequently used data, file lists, that kind of stuff, in memory. So it doesn't have to go digging through the hard drive every time it needs that information.
So it's all about having the important stuff at its fingertips.
That's the idea. It can save a ton of time, especially for those common queries.
Makes sense. But what about when the data sets are just like mind-bogglingly huge? Even with caching, there's got to be a limit to how much Presto can hold in memory at once, right?
There is, of course.
Yeah.
And that's where federation comes in, which is a fancy way of saying, let's team up.
Teamwork makes the dream work, as they say.
Right. So imagine, instead of one giant Presto cluster trying to manage everything,
Which, let's face it, could get pretty overwhelming.
it could. Instead, you have smaller clusters, each responsible for a chunk of the data.
Okay, so it's like dividing and conquering the data.
Exactly. And they have this system called a gateway, which acts like a traffic cop. It directs queries to the right cluster.
Ah, so if I ask a question about, I don't know, Uber Eats orders in, say, California, the gateway knows to send that query to the California cluster.
Boom. You got it. It keeps everything running smoothly, even at massive scale.
So even if a company has, like, I don't know, petabytes of data spread across, like, a zillion systems,
Easy.
Presto can still wrangle it all.
Wrangle it, analyze it, you name it. And here's the best part. Remember we were talking about the cloud earlier?
Oh, yeah, how could we forget the cloud?
Presto and the cloud, they're like best friends.
It's all about that flexibility and scalability.
100%.
Yeah.
Being able to scale up your computing power when you need it, then scale back down when you don't. It's like magic.
It's like having a data center that magically expands and shrinks based on demand. So cool.
And Presto, it's designed to take full advantage of that.
Yeah.
The research you sent specifically mentioned how well it works with Amazon S3.
Right, which is basically, what, like a giant hard drive in the cloud?
Think of it like that, yeah. Instead of companies needing to store all their data in their own data centers, they can just use S3. Presto can access it directly.
No more worrying about, like, running out of storage space or having to buy a bunch of new servers. That's amazing.
Right, it's super cost effective. And Presto, it has some cool tricks that make working with S3 even faster, like this thing called lazy seeking. Basically, it won't actually pinpoint the exact location of data until the very last moment.
Lazy, but in a good way.
In a very good way.
Yeah.
It avoids a lot of unnecessary back and forth.
It's like knowing you have the right book, but only opening it to the exact page you need. No time wasted flipping through.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this whole graceful expansion and shrink thing, that's also tied to the cloud's elasticity, right?
Bingo. Let's say it's Friday night, and
That's
suddenly
the Friday night.
Uber Eats orders are through the roof.
Right.
With Presto on the cloud, they can just automatically spin up more worker nodes to handle that surge in demand.
Yeah.
Then, when things calm down, those nodes just disappear. It's magical.
It's like a data crunching flash mob. Appears when you need it, vanishes when you don't.
Amazing.
It sounds like Presto, paired with the power of the cloud, is like the ultimate recipe for data domination.
It's powerful stuff. It lets companies analyze massive amounts of data in real time without those insane hardware investments. It's revolutionary, really.
It's crazy impressive. But with all this, are there, like, any areas where Presto struggles? Or is this the mythical data unicorn we've been searching for?
Well, even unicorns have their quirks, right? Like any system, Presto isn't perfect. And even in the research you sent, they hinted at some challenges.
Oh, that's interesting, because so far this has all sounded pretty amazing. What are some of the challenges they mentioned?
One thing was the importance of accurate data statistics. Basically, Presto uses these statistics to optimize queries.
Like knowing, I don't know, how much data is in a certain range so it knows where to look first?
Exactly. But keeping those stats up to date when you have data constantly changing, that can be tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like trying to hit a moving target. There was something else too, right? About a general gateway.
Oh, right. So initially, the developers, they wanted to create this like super gateway. It would handle routing queries, not just for Presto.
But for other systems too, like Spark, Hive, all the big players.
Exactly. One gateway to rule them all.
A noble goal. What happened?
Turns out it's really hard. Building something that complex that could handle that much traffic, it became a bottleneck.
Too much traffic for even the best traffic cop to handle, so sometimes simpler is better.
Sometimes, yeah. Direct connections to the Presto clusters worked better in a lot of cases. And honestly, there are times when even Presto itself has limitations.
Really? What do you mean?
It's amazing at what it does. But certain types of queries, like if you're doing these massive joins with gigantic data sets,
So, like, trying to combine two enormous tables of data.
yeah, sometimes a different tool might be better suited for that. Something like Spark, maybe.
So it's all about using the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And this highlighted another challenge they mentioned, which is making those transitions between tools as smooth as possible.
So it's not just about having the best tools, but about being able to easily switch between them when you need to.
You got it. So yeah, Presto is awesome, but it's not the be-all and end-all. There's this whole ecosystem to think about.
It's like building a dream team. You need the right players, the right coach, and they all need to work together. And in the world of data, that means considering the whole ecosystem. So as we go even deeper into this world, what else should we keep in mind? What makes a data ecosystem truly great?
Yeah, and like you said, even with a dream team, you need that solid game plan. It's not enough to just have the talent. It's true. And the research, they really emphasized that. They talked about having a flexible data schema.
Okay, so the schema, that's basically just like how the data is organized, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like the blueprint for your data.
Mm.
And they're saying that blueprint needs to be adaptable because let's face it, in the real world, things change.
Always. You discover new data sources, new ways to analyze things, and if your data setup is too rigid, you're stuck.
Totally. It'd be like trying to remodel your house, but, the walls are made of concrete.
Mhm.
Not very practical.
Not at all. So flexibility, that's one key ingredient. What else is essential for a top-tier data ecosystem?
Reliable storage, for sure. It's like the foundation of your house. You can have the fanciest appliances, the coolest furniture, but if the foundation crumbles,
The whole thing goes down.
exactly. You need that solid base. And performance matters too. If your storage system is slow, it's like, what's the point of having a super fast query engine?
It's like having a race car with bicycle tires. Doesn't really matter how powerful the engine is.
It'll hold you back, for sure. And the last thing they really hammered home in the research was the importance of seamless integration.
Integration with what, though? What are we integrating with?
Other tools. It's not enough to just analyze your data in a vacuum. You want to connect those insights to other systems, your reporting tools, your visualization dashboards.
Right, so you can actually do something with those insights.
Exactly. Turn them into actions. And that could even mean integrating with machine learning models.
So it's about creating this whole data ecosystem, right, where information can flow seamlessly between different tools, and you're not stuck manually moving things around.
That's the dream. It's like instead of separate tools, it's all one well-oiled machine.
I love that analogy. And this has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from the challenges of big data to the inner workings of Presto to now thinking about this bigger picture of building a data-driven future.
It's an exciting time to be working with data, that's for sure.
It really is. A huge thank you to you for walking us through all of this. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure, really.
And to all of you listening, we'll be back next time with another deep dive into the world of data. Until then, keep those data fires burning.